being human is being. It's not a human doing. And for many years, I was so caught up in production and external validation that I had to have many conversations about that we are human beings. We are not human doings. And in my reduced circumstances now, that becomes especially clear that all I have responsible for is to be. I don't have to do.
Welcome to the On Being Human podcast, where we believe transforming ourselves can positively transform society. Your host, Brandy Fleck, has the honor of exploring the human condition with real people who bravely share their personal stories of adversity, healing, joy, and more. If you're seeking empowerment, strength, and inspiration, listen in to engage and explore tough topics that help us humanize one another, understand ourselves better, spread love, and connect.
Welcome back this week to the On Being Human podcast. I'm your host, Brandy Fleck. Lynnette Henderson of Smyrna, Tennessee has been a traveler, student, teacher, and trailblazer for most of her life. She was an early childhood educator and a teacher of teachers before getting her PhD in special education and neuroscience. Lynnette has been an avid researcher for a living and pioneered programs around communication in children, autism, stress in parents of children with autism, and employment of people with disabilities. Lynnette has had a busy and amazing career while also being a mother and wife, but her career was halted by a cerebrospinal fluid leak, also known as a CFS leak. Lynnette opens up about what it's like living with her CFS leak caused by Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which also results in depression. She tells us about diagnosis and the ups and downs of trial and error treatments. She also tells us about the impact on her daily activities, personal relationships, and her outlook on life. One of the interesting points about Lynnette's story is that she admits to relying on external validation through her career for fulfillment, and she's had to recalibrate and relearn what it means to be human now with less productivity and more being in the moment as she is, while on a journey to improve her health and help others in the process. You'll learn about the importance of education, blazing your own trail, but also about the importance of health as your foundation and being your own healthcare advocate. Plus, it's okay to embrace the being portion of our human existence. Subscribe to the On Being Human podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Help us out by leaving a rating and review. You can also find this episode at onbeinghumanpodcast.com/episodes/042, where you'll find the links that Lynnette mentions throughout this episode. Want more love? Visit onbeinghumanpodcast.com and sign up with your name and email address, and I'll send you a free gift. It's a personal mantra that I use daily, and I promise no spam whatsoever. Just one little mantra with a big impact. You can also join in the conversation with us on Facebook. That's at On Being Human Podcast. Now, let's hear from Lynnette. All right. Hi, Lynnette. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm about normal.
Okay.
That's always a hard question for how are you doing today? It's hard to answer with everything that goes on with me.
Right. So what does normal mean for you?
The pain is there, but not debilitating. I'm able to get up for a while and do things for myself and around the house on days that are bad. That's not true. And on days that are good, I can push myself to go out and accomplish errands and things like that.
Gotcha. So this sort of gives listeners a little preview of what we're going to be talking about today. But I just want to say real quick that I'm so happy to have you here. And I think you're such an intelligent and successful person. And I really want listeners to get to know you. Before we talk about the main topic of today's show, can you just let us know who you are as a person?
Okay. Well, let's see. I have lived all over the South in multiple places, most often in Tennessee, and the longest stretch I've ever lived anywhere is where I live now, and we've been 30-something years in this house. But before that, I was rarely more than 2 years anywhere. So in my heart, I'm a vagabond. My family loves education. As I was growing up, my parents were going to college, and it was important to them that we go to college. I got my first degree right after high school in 3 years in early childhood and elementary education. I taught for a year or two, and then I was home having babies.
Mm-hmm.
And then I worked at a preschool, and I got a master's in gifted and early childhood education. Then I wanted to go ahead and get my doctorate, but at that time I didn't have a job anymore. And so I was kind of in this big limbo that was very hard. Finally, in 1995, I started my doctorate at Vanderbilt University, Peabody College, in the special education department.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal was to work on gifted ed and neuroscience.
Wow.
And I was one of the first few who did that big crossover into neuroscience. At the time, there wasn't even a major that was neuroscience. And so it was an interesting journey in trailblazing. The Vanderbilt Kennedy Center has a well-known EEG lab that's run very well by my friend Sasha Key. But my dissertation is the study that set it up.
Wow. Okay.
It was fun to be a part of that at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center and at Vanderbilt Special Ed Department. And so when I finished in 2000, it took me 5 years, which was longer than any of my cohort, but only one other of my cohort had a child.
Mm-hmm.
I also was the only one that was doing groundbreaking. And then when I graduated in 2000, I started at Austin P, and I taught teachers in early childhood and special ed. I trained teachers, did a lot of supervision of teachers. So I did that for 3 years, and at that point, I was starting to miss research.
Mm-hmm.
And I checked back in with some of my mentors at Vanderbilt, and there was a postdoc available in autism, and my dissertation had been about early communication in typical children, but in looking at the ways in which they communicate non-verbally,
mm-hmm.
which is a deficit in autism. So it made a sense. And I had been interested in autism for some time. I had done a research competency on it. And so it was a good fit. And I had a really great couple of years there. And then I transitioned to the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center and ran their recruitment for a while. When we got a University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, I worked more in that.
Okay.
And did a lot of what would be basically PR media work in terms of being out and doing a lot of events and, having a booth at conventions and conferences and such.
Okay.
And I also was involved in some of the first studies we did at Vanderbilt in sleep and autism.
Oh.
I helped get that set up. I also was involved in our study of stress in parents of kids with autism. We did a treatment study on how to help parental stress for parents who have kids with disabilities. Then I started working on employment of people with disabilities. I was involved with in helping us get and run the 5-year systems and policy change grant that was called Tennessee Works.
Okay.
So
that is so much.
That's more than you need.
No, that's awesome. It blows my mind. That's so amazing.
Because how we knew each other before. You just knew me as Holly, Amy, and Susan's mama.
Well, yeah, but I knew that you had gotten your PhD, but that was about the extent of it. So that's awesome. So it sounds like your career is really important to you, but...
Yes, probably too important.
Okay.
Because a lot of my life was built around external validation that I got through work.
Gotcha.
Maybe more than it needed to be.
Well, so what do you believe is the most important thing in life now?
Faith, family, health. I think health is undervalued by many people.
So that brings us to what you're here to talk about today is some health complications that you've been going through for a while, primarily a cerebrospinal fluid leak, which is also called a CSF leak. Can you tell our listeners what that is?
Sure. I have a genetic disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it means that the genes that tell my body to make collagen, which is the fiber in all of our organs and tissues, mine tells my body to make it badly.
Okay.
It's just not well constructed. So my joints and ligaments are too stretchy, and that's the hypermobile part. And my tissues can be very fragile. And the tissue that comes to bear in the cerebrospinal fluid leak is the dura mater, is what it's called. And it's the thick covering around your brain and spinal cord that's designed to protect it and also to hold the fluid that it floats in. So it's the balloon, if you will, that cushions your brain and your spinal cord. People with Ehlers-Danlos are more likely to get a cerebrospinal fluid leak because our tissues are funky and not put together well. And also because collagen is also in your bones. And so I also have a lot of bone spurs, and mostly in my back. So what we have come to understand is that at least one of the places where I was leaking, it was where a bone spur was just poking holes in it.
Oh.
And depending on how I would move or bend or whatever, it would poke a different hole. And so there was a whole section around that bone spur that was porous like a soaker hose.
Okay.
I had surgery in April of 2018. It was hard to see the bone spur, but they could see it. And so they said, okay, we can fix that. And so I went to LA to the top neurosurgeon who deals with cerebrospinal fluid leaks, and his name is Dr. Wouter Shavink.
Okay.
And he opened up my spine, and he had to sand off the bone spur, patch the porous part with a patch of artificial dura, and then sew all that back up. That's what I had done. And that helped for 4.5 months. And then I started leaking again.
Do you know why you started leaking again?
Not for sure, because we haven't been able to find another bone spur. But my assumption scientifically is that the process that causes bone spurs doesn't only happen in one place, and that the likelihood of there being another bone spur is good, and the fact that we can't see it to know where it is just my bad luck.
Gotcha. Well, what was recovery like for you with that kind of surgery?
It was a good month before it quit really hurting, and it's still sensitive back there, even more than a year later. I'm still regrowing the nerves so that there's numb patches around it. And also, I have a dear friend who loves to hug me and part of her hug is patting on the back. And I have to say, she's just, whoa, gentle. And she's learned that she has to change her hug with me.
Gotcha.
So I after about a month, sometime. So this was at the beginning of April. So at the end of May, I started PT again to try and get normal strength back from having been in bed so long. Because, and I left this part out. So a CSF leak means that you don't have as much CSF cradling your brain.
Okay.
And so while it should float, it actually slumps down in your brain, down in your skull.
Okay.
And that particular, it may draw down through the foramen that separates the skull from the spine. The brain may sag down through there. That's not very good for the structures that does. It causes the meninges, which are another coating around your brain, to swell. It tries to make up the difference. Your brain is constantly making CSF fluid, which is a good thing. But if it can't, if it can't get down into your spine well, because your brain is is not where it should be, not floating, then it doesn't circulate well.
Gotcha.
There's just a lot of things that can happen from it.
Okay. So what is it like living with a CSF leak? What are some of the physical symptoms you experience, and also the emotional and mental consequences that come up?
I am genetically more at risk for depression because of the Ehlers-Danlos and some other genetic stuff going on. So I've actually been in some form of treatment or remission from depression since I was 28, 29.
Okay.
Probably could have used it before then, but that's when I started getting help. So I've been on antidepressants and been usually affiliated with some form of a therapist almost nonstop since then. And I'm 58. So, more than half my life.
Sure.
And so the depression for me is mostly, it makes me doubt myself. It makes it difficult for me to start things. And it does affect my sleep. And so sometimes depression shows itself as insomnia. For me, mostly it shows itself as needing more sleep.
Okay.
That's Esther making a guest appearance.
Nice.
The having a CSF leak is not good for your brain. So, and I started having headaches every day in 2010.
Okay.
And I am not sure exactly why. It may have been that's when I finally started developing the bone spurs. It may have been because I had a wreck. I'm not sure. But I started talking to doctors about I'm fatigued and I have headaches in 2010. And they said, hey, you turned 50. And, it's not surprising that you're slowing down. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Prior to this, I was an Energizer bunny.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not normal. And so for years, I was talking to different people about this, different medical people, about why do I feel this way, that sort of thing. In 2012, they got really bad with a migraine-like focus.
Okay.
And I have had migraines in the past, but not to the extent that I had then. And part of it was food allergies that I figured out finally that cause my migraines. They're triggers. Mm-hmm. But I also don't know how much of it was I leaking then? Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
We don't know how long I've been leaking. And because I've had a headache every day since 2010, it started getting a lot worse in 2015, 2016.
Okay.
It was starting to interfere with my ability to work after I would have a big event where I would be on my feet or be really engaged. and busy for 2 or 3 days, I would basically break down and I would have the flu is what it felt like.
Okay.
And I would be in bed and sleep 20 hours a day and have a headache and hurt all over. And then after 3 or 4 days, I'd be fine. And I knew it wasn't really the flu, but I didn't have any other way to understand it. Now I know that it was Ehlers-Danlos flare because I've done too much and asked too much of my body.
Okay.
And there may have been some element of CSF leak in there as well. But by 2016, I was having trouble getting to work on time. I was having trouble getting there more than 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
It was because the headaches were so much worse, and they were all the time. And in addition to the headache, there's also this real brain fog that happens because your brain isn't floating like it should be, and
Mm-hmm.
so it doesn't work as well as it should. And so I have trouble with word finding and concentration, and just when your mind is supposed to be the major tool of your work and it's not showing up for the job, everything becomes very effortful.
Right.
I also have very common symptoms also include neck pain, pain in the middle of my shoulder blades. Those are very common symptoms as well.
Gotcha.
And I couldn't figure out the position. And one of the big markers for a CSF leak is that your headache goes away if you lay down.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was still trying to work and everything, I wasn't picking up on the positional nature of it. And so in 2017, I had to have an unrelated surgery on my abdomen, and I had to wear a binder for 2 weeks.
Okay.
This big elastic band that goes around your body.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, I must be on good drugs because my head doesn't hurt. For the first time, and I can remember, my head is not hurting. And I put it off to the drugs. And then it didn't hurt and it didn't hurt. And I was like, wow, this is great. I feel wonderful. I don't know what it is, but
Mm-hmm.
So then the 2 weeks were up and I took the binder off and I was hit with this massive headache that was worse than any I had before. And it was not a migraine because I tried my migraine medicine and it didn't touch it.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a week like this and I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. And so I started Googling around, as you do, and realized that, I finally realized that it was positional, that if I laid down, it would go away.
Mm-hmm.
And when I put positional together with the binder, I found out that those two things, because the binder increases CSF pressure because, it's increasing pressure throughout your body
Mm-hmm.
of the abdomen. And so one of the things that they used to do was put a binder on to help people function.
Gotcha.
With their CSF leak. And so, but they also mentioned there was this big rebound effect that once you took it off, the headache came back with a vengeance. And I realized that's what had happened and that's what was going on with me. Most people don't think Google diagnostics is a good idea, but I have to tell you, most of us with CSF diagnose ourselves and then we go to the doctors and try to get some help.
Interesting. You mentioned a little bit about some of your journey with going through the surgery and, trial and error, figuring out what was going on. But how did you get diagnosed, and have there been sort of trial and error treatments, and how is that going?
I definitely diagnosed myself, and then I went to the emergency room and said, I think I have a CSF leak, I said, I have a positional headache that was worse after I took my binder off. And, you try not to tell the doctors what it is,
Yeah.
but you lay the clues so that they come up and on their own.
Right.
You have to know how this works.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they did an MRI of my brain, and they said, oh, it looks normal. And except for places in the white matter, which is the covering of your nerve cells. And there are breaks in it which are consistent with migraine, because apparently migraine permanently damages your brain.
Okay.
Good to know.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, yeah, it definitely does. And so they patted me on my head and sent me on my way and said, well, you need to see a neurologist. And so they set me an appointment for August, and this was April.
Mm.
And I said, well, that's not going to work for me. So I checked around Vanderbilt, since I did a Dear Colleague letter and basically said, this is what's going on with me. Do you have expertise in this field? And although Vanderbilt has some excellent people who work on cranial leaks, so those are when there's a leak in your head itself rather than in the spine. They have people who work on those and do really good work. I didn't find anyone who worked on spinal CSF leaks. So, and the symptoms are different, which is why I knew I probably didn't have a cranial. And so then I got online and found a Facebook page of people and a website, the Spinal CSF Leak Organization.
Okay.
Lays out all the symptoms and what to do and how to get diagnosed and stuff like that. And the Facebook group also said there are 3 major people. And my thought was, if I'm going to have this done and I can't get it done at Vanderbilt, then I'm going to go to the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so Cedars-Sinai in LA and Duke in North Carolina are the 2 major centers, and they're trying to train more people at different places. But those are the 2 that do most of the research, that have dedicated centers for that, and who are leading the field. And so, because I have children, I have 2 adult daughters in LA, I thought, I'm going to go to LA because at least I'll have a place to stay.
Yeah.
So I contacted Dr. Shavink with a letter in May of 2017, and I got scheduled to go and see them, and I saw them in late July of 2017. So before I could have gotten into a neurologist at Vanderbilt.
Yeah. Wow.
And so they do very specialized imaging, and you actually are put under, and they stop your breathing for a minute so that they can do the imaging without the motion of your breathing.
Okay.
And then they do that one day, and then like the next day you'll come in and they'll do the patch. So an epidural blood patch is the first treatment. And basically the idea is that they put a little blood on the outside of your dura and want it to run up and down wherever that might need to be, so that it forms a scab over the hole.
Okay.
so that it has time to heal. And so I had that done at the end of July in 2017, and I got 2.5 good weeks out of it.
Okay.
Before I assume the bone spur poked my scab, and that was the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very discouraging because particularly my husband was under the impression that this would be a one, do it, fix, done.
Mm-hmm.
I'd read enough stories online to know that that might not be the case, but I was thrilled when I got such good results. And the thing about it is that, you spend all your time in bed, horizontal,
Mm-hmm.
and going out or doing anything results in pain and more time in bed. And then, you go and you have this treatment and you get 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
So then we decided that maybe I would see what Vanderbilt could do. Now that we'd identified the fact that I had a leak, they would buy that, they would help me.
Okay.
So in August, I tried a different kind of, In September, I tried a different kind of imaging to look for the leak at Vanderbilt. They don't do that at LA anymore because it's not considered to be as effective. But at Vanderbilt, that's what they wanted to do.
Okay.
And it involved injecting dye into my CSF fluid, and then they were watching to see where it would leak out. And the only place they saw it was in my urine. So who knows what that meant, but it didn't help them identify where it was leaking.
Sure.
Knowing now that it was so porous, that doesn't make sense. That makes sense that it didn't end up showing up much. And then I tried a blood patch in October at Vanderbilt. It was a very different system. At Cedars, they do the blood patch, you're out. It's guided by fluoroscopy, so they can see where they're putting the needle and everything. And then they keep you 4 to 6 hours flat so that the patch can form. And then they recommend that you stay flat 72 hours after that, after you get home. At Vanderbilt, I did it outpatient. I came in, they were able to get very little blood in me and hurt like crazy. And they expected me to walk out right after it was done.
Oh, good.
It did not help. It was the most painful one I've ever had.
Okay.
So when that didn't work, I got back in touch with people in LA, and I went back and I had 2 patches the day after Christmas. So Amy and I were in LA, and Holly and her family were in St. Louis with her husband's family, and my husband and my parents were in my house in Tennessee because my husband had just had his knees replaced and still needed help. So it was a very distributed Christmas.
Gotcha.
They did 2 patches that time, one in my lumbar, which is where they do most of them, and then the other one in my thoracic region because they thought they saw that bone spur and they thought maybe that will help.
Okay.
I didn't really have a definitive, yes, I'm better, and no, I'm not. But by the end of January, it was pretty clear to me that we hadn't gained anything.
Okay.
Also, by that time, my job was done. And so that was a big transition.
Gotcha.
In some ways. I had been at home a lot anyway, but just being flat. But it was difficult to leave that job that I loved.
Sure.
So at the end of January, I got back in touch with my surgeon at Cedars and said, okay, this isn't working. And so they had me come in March, and at the end of March, and I spent 4 days in the hospital, and they put a catheter into my spine and filled me up with saline so that they could see I really did have a leak, because the thought was, is if they filled me up and I felt better, then it was for sure a leak. And so they filled me up, and I definitely felt better. It was wonderful to not have a headache for a change, but also as a indicator that my brain had started floating again, all my vitals went crazy. My blood pressure would drop down to 60 over 40, and then the next day it would be, the next hour it'd be 120 over 90, and it just went everywhere.
Wow.
My temperature fluctuated. It was all those brainstem functions, the autonomic functions that should be going on automatically, just kind of had to reset after they started floating again. That determined that, yes, I definitely had a leak, and they decided that the bone spur was the most likely place to fix. And so on April 2nd, that's what we did the surgery. Like I said, I got 4.5 months. I started leaking again end of July, 1st of August in there. It's not exactly clear. It seemed as though it was because of some overzealous PT. We transitioned into the final, a different phase of PT because I was doing okay. And after that, I started having the positional headaches again. I started talking to them in LA again and said, things aren't working. And they said, do a new MRI. And I had to wait. So I got that done here and sent it to them. And I went out and had another blood patch. It was iffy how much it helped. I had a better December. It's not clear to me whether it was because I saw my family as much as I did, or if I actually was better. But then in January, I got in touch with my doctor and I said, okay, look, it's clear to me that blood patches aren't helping. The one piece that did help was taking the bone spur off. What do we need to do next? And the doctor basically said, I don't think you have any more bone spurs, and you should just go see a headache doctor. And I thought, I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
So I got my information together and I sent it to Duke, which is the other major place. And they are known for their innovative and groundbreaking ways of imaging. And so my hope is that Duke would be able to use their magic imaging to find another place to fix.
Gotcha.
To find another bone spur or something. And so I sent my stuff to them in March. At the beginning of March, they got it March 5th. At the end of March, they asked for my imaging records from Cedars Sinai in LA. And in mid-April, I got a call that said, yes, we've looked at your stuff, and yes, we will be taking you as a patient.
Awesome.
Yeah, there are 80 people in front of you, so we don't know when it'll be.
Oh, no.
And
okay.
So I called them 2 weeks ago, and they said it would definitely not be August. It might be September, more likely October.
Okay. It sounds like you've had a pretty long journey so far. You've done some trial and error stuff. I'm hearing you say you're definitely your own advocate in terms of your healthcare and making progress in treatment that you want to see.
Oh, absolutely. It's exhausting.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
To manage this, I got a new primary care doctor in the hopes that they would become my sort of guide and help me manage all the things, because there's other stuff going on too. And she was like, yeah, I don't know anything about this. She helps me get the pre-labs when I go to have surgery. And other than that, she's just kind of like, you do you.
You're definitely managing that stuff. It sounds like that you've had to cope with, you've mentioned transition. It's impacted your career. Can you just touch on how your personal relationships have been impacted as you've been going through this?
Yeah. Well, it's not positive.
Okay.
For my husband, I think the worst thing was, it was a shock that we had to adjust to just his pay. done okay, but for a lot of families, that might not have been the case. I'd always been the one who carried our insurance, and now he had to do that. Some of the things we did as a couple is we always went to church together, and on Friday nights we went to dinner and movies with our two best friends, and on Saturdays in the fall we went to every Vanderbilt game, and we traveled, and we had a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not part of our life anymore. And that's been very difficult for him, particularly the fact that it's hard for me to go to church. Getting ready is exhausting, and my insomnia is so bad that the only time I'm likely to be sleeping is at 9 o'clock in the morning, because you can't guarantee that I'll be asleep at 3 o'clock in the morning. In fact, you can pretty much guarantee I won't be. But 9 o'clock in the morning, almost every day. So
you take what you can get.
Yeah. It's just been no fun. This is nobody's idea of fun. My girls have been fabulous supports, and that's been great. I've actually gotten to see the ones in LA more often than I would otherwise, because I'm going out there twice a year or once a year, and laying on their couch. I can read to my grandkids, and we find lots of ways to have fun that don't involve me picking up things or bending or twisting or any of the things I'm not supposed to do. But it constrains everything. I've had lovely support from people at church who send me cards and tell me they're thinking about me, but I don't see people. And as a former extrovert, that is hard.
Oh,
I say former because I've had a lot of personality change, because my brain's not the same, so I'm not the same. And being in pain does not lend itself toward having a rousing good time.
Right.
When I'm out in public, everything is too loud or too bright or both, because that's the way my brain works now. And sitting up straight is difficult. When I'm at home, if I sit up, I'm in my recliner and I have a heating pad on my back, but I can't do that out.
Sure. Have you been able to develop any coping mechanisms? What do you do to cope with these changes, basically, and transitions, and to get yourself through these times?
The Osher Center for Integrative Health at Vanderbilt has been a huge partner ever since I got my Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis.
Okay.
And of course, with the CSF leaks, I've done classes there on mindfulness. I've done classes on grieving, particularly related to grieving a diagnosis, grieving the loss of health, that sort of thing. I have a doctor there who knows chronic illness, and so she manages the pain and issues around my Ehlers-Danlos. And I've also done PT there off and on. If I want to try something new, I talk with her about it, and we try it. So this year, when I was kind of in a people have washed their hands of me way, I went to a Reiki healer. And the first time I went, I got 2.5 good weeks of sleep. I didn't get that the second time, but that was interesting. I'm also doing craniosacral therapy, which helps the lymphatic system and the CSF flow. The main thing that's done is it's completely changed the nature of my migraines that I get. So they are much less painful and somewhat less often. I also saw a naturopath, and she helped me recognize some foods that were increasing inflammation. And so I'm now, in addition to not eating corn and chocolate, I'm also trying to avoid wheat, dairy. I've moved to A2 milk and goat cheese. I'm also trying not to eat potatoes and peanut butter and soy. The other trigger for migraines is weather. If the barometric pressure does something big, either drops or goes up, I'm likely to get a migraine. That seems to have been better with the craniosacral therapist. I also see a therapist weekly to talk about how this is not fun.
Yeah, so that's a lot of stuff. And it seems like a lot to maintain. Can you tell me a little bit about maintaining this pace of these different therapies and things that you have to do? Is there any hope that you'll come off of some of them?
So I haven't done any of them all at once.
Okay.
I've kind of done them serially, if you will.
Okay.
And most are not covered by insurance, those last 3 that I talked about. Truthfully, though, I'm looking at my weekly appointment with my therapist. And if I am not well enough to go that day, I call him and I tell him I'm not well enough to go that way. And he knows that it's true and it's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. And then I would rarely have more than one other appointment a week.
Okay.
It's not overwhelming in that way because I don't get to see them that often, for one thing, and also I didn't do it all at once.
Gotcha.
I'm very careful with how I plan to be out of bed or go places.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't do it lightly.
Okay.
If I go out, I'll, go to the appointment I'm going to, and then I'll do maybe one other thing that I need to do that's outside the house while I'm out.
Okay.
And then I come home and I have to go to bed, and I usually fall asleep.
Lynnette, if you met someone in a similar situation or who has the same diagnosis and they were having trouble maintaining hope and getting through it, what advice would you give?
2 weeks ago, I had to take Susan to the emergency room, which basically means a 7-hour visit.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, I saw this couple come in, and the woman looked like she was in pain, and they had a huge pillow, and they had this big bag of stuff with them. And I thought, that is an ER pro. She has been here before.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I wonder if she's a leaker, because the pillow kind of, was, I thought,
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's really private in an ER waiting room. And she went back and she didn't come back out. And I heard her husband say that she was back there laying down because she did better laying down. And I went, ding. And I'm nosy anyway. So I went over and said, hi, and basically said, I have a CSF leak, and, which means a positional headache, and sounds like maybe something like that's going on with your wife. And he come to find out it had been almost 2 years that she'd been having headaches, and they had just the 2 or 3 days before this found a pretty good size tear in her dura.
Oh.
And so she was there, and because she was in a lot of pain, and come to find out she had chemical meningitis, which happens sometimes. It's a known complication of treatment. Meningitis means you've got an infection or swelling of your meninges, which are membranes that protect your brain. And hers were swelling and reacting to the testing she'd been having. And so that's why it's chemical meningitis.
Okay.
So I talked to him, gave him my contact information, and said, when she's ready, if she wants to talk to somebody else who's been through this, I'm happy to do that. And also there's this great Facebook group that they know everything, and because they've been through everything. And I mean, there are people on there who have gotten healed and done great. And they pop by and tell us their success stories. And there are also people on there who've been leaking for 20 years or who've had over 80 patches, epidural blood patches. I mean, so there's a wide variety of we've been there, done that. So she did, in fact, when she got well enough to look at a screen, contact me, and I got her connected. So for me, if I was going to say, I sent her the link to csfleaks.org,
okay,
and I got her connected with the Facebook page, which is a private one. And that's what I would do, because people come alongside you and they know what you're going through. And if you need to say, I don't know how I can do this anymore, they'll tell you.
Yeah.
The online communities have been huge in helping. And, the best way to not wallow is to think about other people. It helps me every day to see that somebody's had some success or that somebody else needs help and I can help them. And that gets me out of my own pity party. And I mean, helping was huge in my professional life.
Yeah.
And it's just a real big part of who I am personally. So having the ability to sometimes do that for others through the Facebook group or other avenues like that crazy night we were at the ER, that's important. I also, when things get bad for the depression, I talk to my psychiatrist at the Osher Center, and we've changed my meds in the last 3 years, and we've upped my meds in the last 6 months, and I have a list of why it's a good idea for me not to die. And I regularly add things to that list of stuff I'm looking forward to that is a good reason to stay on the planet.
Gotcha. Wow. I was taking it all in. I really appreciate you sharing this. That's some pretty personal stuff. And I think, like you said, helping people is important. And I think you sharing your story will definitely help some people. So is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think is important to say?
Yeah, I do need to say one thing.
Okay.
One of my major coping strategies, which all my life I've been a reader. I've been reading myself to sleep since I could read, and often that to sleep did not happen at a normal hour, so that's nothing new. But reading has become a huge escape / reason for waking up. I use Goodreads, which is an app that keeps up with what you've read and what authors you like and things like that. So I have 560 something books on my to read page. And so that always is like, I still got a lot to read.
Yeah.
And I've read 450 something already this year.
Oh my goodness.
I think that's right. Maybe it's just 350. I don't know. It's on my
That's still
Goodreads
so
page.
many. Yeah.
But yeah, I'll go over 600 this year. I think it was 5 something last year.
Awesome. Well, what's your favorite book?
Oh, I don't have a favorite book, and how could you? It's like, do you have what's your favorite sunset?
Yeah.
I have many books I love, but I don't have a favorite.
Gotcha.
But anyway, reading is huge for me, and because you can do it laying down. And I mostly read on my phone using the library apps for electronic books. So it's easy to do, and I've always loved it. And it takes you out of yourself because you're somewhere else in the book.
Right. And I want to say, too, you've mentioned lots of links and organizations and even Goodreads, and all of those things, just so our listeners know, will be on the show notes there. So they'll have access to all those places you mentioned. Lynnette, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, I hope it helps somebody. Helping's important.
I have to tell you that this was the first episode we recorded for season 2 of the podcast. We recorded it well in advance of today's air date. So we got a little update from Lynnette. We got one from her back in January of 2020, and then she gave us another one in March of 2020. So here it is. She says, when I went to Duke in September 2019, they agreed that I didn't have a CSF leak. But unlike my California specialist, he suggested that my orthostatic headache might be due to dysautonomia and has referred me to the nationally recognized clinic at Vanderbilt. I am on week 12 of the 14-week review period where they decide whether to take my case. After they decide, it is 4 to 5 months until appointments are available. So I'm waiting again, but I did read 654 books in 2019, though. Oh my gosh, that is so impressive. 654. And at this point, Lynnette has a June 2020 spot with the dysautonomia clinic. So that's awesome. I wish you the best of luck in your healthcare journey, Lynnette. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in weekly at onbeinghumanpodcast.com for more soul-exposing explorations of what it means to be human. Until next week, Love to you all.